Chapter 7, Don't Let the Beatles Get You Down. Here is a dramatic story that I'll probably remember as long as I live. It was told to me by Robert Murray of 14 Highland Avenue, Maplewood, New Jersey. I learned the biggest lesson of my life in March 1945, he said. I learned it under 276 feet of water off the coast of Indochina. I was one of the 88 men aboard the submarine via SS-318. We had discovered by radar that a small Japanese convoy was coming our way. As daybreak approached, a submerged to attack. I saw through the periscope a Jap destroyer is called a tanker and a mine layer. We fired three torpedoes at the destroyer's cord but missed. Something went haywire in the mechanic of each torpedo. The destroyer, not knowing that she had been attacked, continued on. Something went haywire in the mechanic of each torpedo. The destroyer, not knowing that she had been attacked, continued on. We were getting ready to attack last ship, the mine layer, when suddenly she turned and came directly at us. A Jap plane had spotted us under 60 feet of water and had radioed our position to the Jap mine layer. We went down to 150 feet to avoid detection and rig for a depth charge. We put extra bolt on the hatches, and in order to make our sub absolute silent, we turned off the fans and cooling system and all electrical gears. 3 minutes later, all hell broke loose. Six depth charges exploded all around us and pushed us down to the ocean for a depth 276 feet. We were terrified to be attacked in less than 1,000 feet of water is dangerous less than 500 feet is almost fatal, and we were being attacked in triple more than half of 500 feet of water, just about knee deep as far as safely was concerned. For 15 hours, that Jap mine layer kept dropping depth charges. In a depth charges explode within 70 feet of a sub, the concussion will blow a hole in it. Scores of these depth charges exploded within 50 feet of us. We were ordered to secure to lie quietly in our bunks and remain calm. I was so terrified I could hardly breathe. This is that, I keep saying to myself over and over. This is that. This is that. With the fans and cooling system turned off, the air inside the sub was over 100 degree, but I was so chilled with fear that I put on a sweater and a far line jacket, and still I tremble with cold. My teeth chattered. I broke out in a cold, calmly sweat. The attack continued for 15 hours. Then ceased suddenly. Apparently, the Jap miner had exhausted its supply for depth charges and steamed away. Those 15 hours of attack seems like 15 million years. All my life passed before me in the review. I remember all the bad things I had done, all the little absurd thing I had worried about. I had been a bank clerk before I joined the Navy. I had worried about the long hours, the poor pay, the poor perspective of advancement. I had worried because I couldn't own my own home, couldn't buy a new car, couldn't buy my wife nice clothes. How I had hated my old boss who was always nagging and scolding, and I remember how I would come home at night sore and grouchy and quarrel with my wife over trifle. I had worried about scars on my forehead, a nasty cut from an auto accident. How big all these worries seems years ago, but how absurd they seems when depth charges were threatening a blow me to kingdom come. I promised myself then and there, if I ever saw the sun, the star again, I would never worry again. Never. I learned more about the art of living in those 15 terrible hours in that submarine that I had learned my studying books for 4 hours in Syracuse University. We often face the major disaster of life bravely and then let the trifle. The planes in the neck get us down. For example, Samuel Pepys tell in his diary about seeing Sir Harry Vane had chopped off in London. As Sir Harry mounted the platform, he was not pleading for his life. He was pleading with the executioner not to hit the painful on boil on his neck. That was another thing that Admiral Barrett discovered down in the terrible cold and darkness of the polar night, that his men fused more about the pain in the neck and then about the big things. They bore without compelling the dangers, the hardship, and the cold that was often 80-degree below zero. But see, Admiral Byrd, I know of bunkmates who quite speaking because each suspected the other of inching his gear into the other allotted space, and I knew of one who could not eat unless he could find a place in the mess hall out of the sight of the Fletcherist who solemnly chewed his food 28 times before swallowing. In a polar camp, say Admiral Byrd, little things like that was have the power to drive even this plain a man to the edge of insanity. And you might have added, Admiral Byrd, that little things in marriage drive people to the edge of insanity and cause half the heartaches in the world. At least that is what the authorities say. For example, Judge Joseph Sabbat of Chicago, after acting as arbiter in more than 40,000 unhappy marriages, declared trivialities are at the bottommost martial unhappiness. And Frank S. Hogan, district attorney of New York County, say fully half the cases in our criminal courts originate in little things: barroom bravado, domestic wrangling, an insulting remark, a disparaging word, a rude action. Those are the little things that lead to assault and murder. Very few of us are curiously and greatly wrong. It is the small blow of our self esteem, the indignities, the little jolts to our vanity which cause half the heartaches in the world. When Eleanor Roosevelt was first married, she worried for days because her new cook had served a poor meal. But if that happened now, Miss Roosevelt say I would shrug my shoulder and forget it. And good, that is acting like an adult emotionally. Even Catherine the Great, an absolute autocrat, used to laugh the things off when the cook spoiled a meal. Miss Carnage and I had dinner at a friend's house in Chicago. While carving the meat, he did something wrong. I didn't notice it, and I wouldn't have cared even if I had noticed it. But his wife saw it and jumped down his throat right in front of us. John, she cried, watch what you are doing. Can't you even learn to surf properly? Then she said to us, he is always making mistake. He just doesn't try. Maybe he didn't try to carve. But I certainly give him credit for trying to live with her for 20 years, frankly. I would rather have eaten a couple of hot dogs with mustard in atmosphere of peace than to have dined on packing duck and shark fins while listening to her scolding. Shortly after that experience, Mr. Carnage and I had some friend at our home for dinner. Just before they arrived, Mr. Carnage found that three of the napkins didn't match the tablecloth. I rushed to the cook, she told me later, and found that the other three napkins had gone to the laundry. The guests were at the door. There was no time to change. Left. I felt like bursting into tears. All I could think was, why did this stupid mistake have to spoil my whole evening? Then I thought, well, why let it? I went it to the dinner determined to have a good time, and I did. I would much rather our friend think I was sloppy housekeeper. She told me that a nervous, bad temper one, and anyone as far as I could make out, no one noticed the napkin. A well-known legal maxim say, "De minimis non curatis lex." The law does not concern itself with trifle, and neither should the warrior if he want peace of mind. Much of the time, all we need to overcome the announce of trifle is to affect a shifting of emphasis, set up a new pleasurable point of view in the mind. My friend Homer Crow, who wrote They Had to See Paris and a dozen other books, gives us a wonderful example of how this can be done. He used to be driving half crazy while working on a book by the rattling of the radiator in his New York apartment. The steam would bang and sizzle, and he would sizzle with irritation as he sat at his desk. Then, say, Homer Crow, I went with some friends on a camping expedition while listening to the limbs crackling in the roaring fire. I thought how much they sounded like the crackling on the radiator. Why should I like one and hate the other? When I went home, I said to myself, the crackling of the limbs in the fire was a pleasant sound. The sound of the radiator is about the same. I'll go to sleep and not worry about the noise. And I did for a few days. I was conscious of the radiator, but soon I forget all about them. And so it is with many pretty worries. We dislike them and we get into a stew all because we exaggerate their importance. This really sad life is too short to be little. Those words said Andrew Morris in this week magazine have helped me through many a painful experience. Often we allow ourselves to be upset by small things we could despise and forget. Here we are on this earth with only a few more decades to live, and we lose many irreplaceable hours brooding over graveness that in a year time will be forgotten by us and by everybody. Now let us devote our life to worthwhile action and feeling to great thought, real affection, enduring undertaking, for life is too short to be little. Even so illustrious a figure as Rudyard Kipling forget at times Life is too short to be little. The result, he and his brother-in-law forget fought the most famous court battle in the history of Vermont battle, so celebrated that a book has been written about it. Rudyard Kipling Vermont feud. The story goes like this: Kipling married a Vermont girl, Caroline Balestier, built a lovely home in Brattleboro, Vermont, settled down and expected to spend the rest of his life there. His brother-in-law, Beatley Ballister, became Kipling's best friend. The two of them worked and played together. The Kipling bought some land from Ballister with the understanding that Ballister would be allowed to cut hay off it each session. One day Ballister found Kipling laying out a flower garden on his hayfield. His blood boiled. He hit the ceiling. Kipling fired right back. The air over the green mountains of Vermont turned blue. A few days later, when Kipling was out riding his bicycle, his mother-in-law drove a wagon and a team of horses across the road suddenly and forced Kipling to take a smile. And Kipling, the man who wrote, "If you can keep your head when all about you are losing there and blaming it on you." He lost his own head and swore out a warrant for Blister arrest. A sensational trial followed. Reporters from the big cities poured into the town. The news flashed around the world. Nothing was settled. This quarrel caused Kipling and his wife to abandon their American home for the rest of their life. All that worry and bitterness over a mere trifle, a load of the hay. Persiles said 24 centuries ago, "Come, gentlemen, we sit too long on trifle." We do indeed. Here's one of the most interesting stories that Dr. Harry Emerson Fosdick ever told, a story about the battles won and lost by giant of the forest. One of the slope of a long park in Colorado lies the ruin of three gigantic tree. Naturalists Naturalists tell us that it stood for some 400 years. It was seeding when Columbus landed at San Salvador and half grown when the pilgrims settled at Plymouth. During the course of its long life, it was struck by lightning 14 times, and the innumerable avalanches and storms of our centuries thundered past it. It survived them all. In the end, however, an army of beetles attacked the tree and leveled it to the ground. The insect ate their way through the bark and gradually destroyed the inner strength of the tree by their tiny but incessant attacks. A forest giant which age had not withered, nor lightning blasted, nor storms subdued, fell at last before beetles so small that a man could crush them between his forefingers and his thumb. A few years ago, I traveled through the Teton National Park in Wyoming with Charles Seafried, highway superintendent for the state of Wyoming, and some of his friends. We were all going to visit the John D. Rockefeller estate in the park, but the car in which I was riding took the wrong turn, got lost, and drove up to the entrance of the street an hour after the other car had gone in. Mr. Seaford had the key that unlocked the private gate, so he waited in the hot, mosquito infested wood for an hour until we arrived. The mosquitoes were enough to drive a scent insane, but They couldn't trump over Charles Seaford while waiting for us. He cut a limb off an aspen tree and made a whistle of it. When we arrived, was he causing the mosquitoes? No, he was playing his whistle. I have kept the, that whistle as a memento of a man who knew how to put trifle in their place. To break the very habit before it breaks you, here is rule 2. Let not allow ourselves to be upset by small things we should despite and forget. Remember, life is too short to be little. Chapter 8, a law that will outlay many of your tour worries. As a child, I grew up on Missouri farm, and one day, while helping my mother pick cherries, I began to carry. My mother said, "Dale, what in the world are you crying about?" I blubbered, "I'm afraid I'm going to be buried alive." I was full of worries in those days. When the thunderstorm came, I worried for fear I would be killed by lightning when hard times came. I worried for fear we wouldn't have enough to eat. I worried for fear I would to go to hell when I died. I was terrified for fear an older boy, Sam White, would cut off my big ears as he threatened to do. I worried for fear girls would laugh at me if I tipped my hat to them. I worried for fear no girls would ever be willing to marry me. I worried about what I would say to my wife immediately after we were married. I imagined that we would be married in some country church and then get in a suri with fringe on the top and ride back to the farm. But how would I be able to keep the conversation going on that ride back to the farm? How I pondered over the earth shaking problem for many an hour as walk behind the plough. As the year went by, I gradually discovered that 99% of the things I worried about never happened. For example, I have already said I was once terrified of lightning, but I now know that the chances of my being killed by lightning in any one year are, according to the National Safety Council, only one in the 350,000. My fear of being buried alive was even more absurd. I don't imagine that one person, 10 millions, is buried alive, yet I once cried for fear of it. One person out of every eight dies of cancer. If I had wanted something to worry about, I should have worried about cancer instead of being killed by lightning or being buried alive. To be sure, I have been talking about the worries of youth and adolescence, but many of our adult warriors are almost as absurd. You and I could probably eliminate 90 90 of our worries right now if we would cease our fretting long enough to discover whether by the law of average there was any real justification of our worries. The most famous insurance company on earth, Lloyd of London, has made countless millions out of the tendency of everybody to worry about things that really happens. Lloyd of London bets bets people that the disaster they are worrying about will never occur. However, Lloyd of London bets from Lloyd of London bets people that the disaster they are worrying about will never occur. However, they don't call it betting, they call it insurance. but it is really batting based on the law of average. This great insurance firm has been going strong for 200 years, and unless human nature changes, it will still be going strong 50 centuries from now by insuring shoes and ships and sailing vessels against disaster that by the law of average don't happen nearly so often as people imagine. If we examine the law of average, we will often be astounded at the facts we uncover. For example, if I knew that during the next 5 years I would have to fight in a battle as bloody as the Battle of the Get- Gettysburg, I would be terrified. I would take out all the life insurance I could get. I would draw up my will and set all my earthly affair in order. I would say I'll probably never live through that battle, so I had better make the most of the few years I have left. Yet the facts are that according to the law of average, it is just as dangerous, just as fatal to try to live from age 50 to age 55 in peacetime as it was to fight in the Battle of Gettysburg. What I'm trying to say is this: in times of peace, just as many people die per thousand between the age of 50 and 55 as were killed per thousand amongst the 163 soldiers who fight at Gettysburg. I wrote the several chapters of this book at James Simpson Namtiga Luch on the shore of Bow Lake in the Canadian Rockies. While stopping there one summer, I met Mr. and Mrs. Herbert Selinger of 22298 Pacific Avenue, San Francisco. Mr. Selinger, a poised, serene woman, gave me the impression that she had never worried. One evening, in front of the roaring fireplace, I asked her if she had ever been troubled by it. She said, "My life was almost ruined by it before I learned to conquer worry. I lived through 11 years of self made hell. I was irritable and hot tempered. I live under terrific tension. I would take the bus every week from my home in San Mateo to shop in San Francisco. But even while shopping, I worried myself into a detour. Maybe I had left the electric iron connected on the ironing board. Maybe the house had caught fire. Maybe the maid had run off and left the children. Maybe they had been out of their bicycle and been killed by a car. In the midst of my shopping, I would often worry myself into cold perspiration and rush out and take the bus home to see if everything was alright. No wonder my first marriage ended in disaster. My second husband is a lawyer, a quite analytical man who never worried about anything. When I became tense and anxious, he would say to me, "Relax, let's think this out. What are you really worrying about? Let's examine the law of average and see whether or not it is likely to happen." For example, I remember the time we were driving from Alcoa, New Mexico to the Carlsbad cabin, driving on a dirt road when we were caught in a terrible rainstorm. The car was slithering and sliding. We couldn't control it. I was positive we could slide off into one of the ditches that flank the road. But my husband kept repeating to me, "I am driving very slowly. Nothing seriously is likely to happen. Even if the car does slide into the ditch, by the law of average, we won't be hurt." This calmness and confidence quieted me. One summer, we were on a camping trip in the Token Valley of the Canadian Rockies. One night, we were camping 7,000 feet above sea level when a storm threatened to tear our tents to shreds. The tent were tied with guy ropes to a wind. I expected every minute to see our tent tore loose and hurl it through the sky. I was terrified, but my husband kept saying, "Look, my dear, we are traveling with Brister guides. Brister know what they are doing. They have been pitching tents in these mountains for 60 years. This tent has been here for many seasons. It hasn't blown down yet, and by the law of average, it won't blow away tonight. And even it does, we can take shelter in another tent. So relax, I did, and I slept soundly the balance of the night. A few years ago, an infantile paralysis epidemic swept over our part of California. In in old days, I would have been hysterical, but my husband persuaded me to act calmly. We took all the precautions we could. We kept our children away from crowd, away from the school and the movies. By consulting the Broadway of Health, we found out that even during the worst infantile paralysis epidemic that California had ever known up to that time, only 1,835 children had been stricken in the entire state of California, and that the usual number was around 200 or 300. Tragic as those figures are, we nevertheless felt that according to the law of average, the chances of any one child being stricken were